God's leave. Right? It's not the case that the other things he can do by himself, he has power to do the other things. He can cure the lepers and cure the blind by himself. But when it comes to the harder things, like creating a bird or bringing people back to life, that there he needs Allah's help. Isa alayhi salam is nothing without Allah. Nobody's anything without Allah. Right? So he can't do anything without Allah's leave. But he specifically mentions his the integral nature of God's permission in these two instances, because these are the two things that are, for one thing, they're harder to do, but most importantly, they're the things that create doubts in people's minds, and they start to think that, well, if somebody can create life, Allah is Khaliq. Allah is the one who can create. So if Isa can create, then he must be God. God is Al-Hayy, and he's the one, he's Muhyi al-Mawta, he's the one who can bring the dead back to life. So if Isa alayhi salam can do that too, then he must be God as well. Right? So these two things in particular, to be able to create life from nothing, and to be able to bring back a dead person, a living person from the dead, these are two things that are, there's a big chance that it's going to cause people to come up with the wrong beliefs and start to kind of go overboard and attribute godliness to Isa alayhi salam. Right? So to preempt that, he wants to mention and make sure that people know that the only way I can do this, the only reason I can do this is because God has given me the ability to do it. Right? So he's truly Muhyi al-Mawta, he's given me the ability, and by his leave I can do this. Right? So he's really emphasizing the fact that it's not independent, I'm not independent in doing these miracles. This miracle of creating a bird is mentioned in one of the Gospels. It's not one of the Gospels that we have in the modern New Testament, though. Right? I don't know if you're aware, but the modern New Testament it's very narrow, actually, if you think about it. Like this is the Bible, but the New Testament is like maybe it's that much. So maybe a fifth of the whole Bible. The modern New Testament, the four Gospels that are included, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're not the only Gospels that existed. Right? All the different disciples, a lot of the disciples, they had their own, possibly, I'm guessing here, but it was most likely a copy of the Injil, or some approximation, some attempts to kind of write down the actual Injil, the actual book of Jesus in their own form, and then they would carry it around with them, teach people from that, other people would copy from them, and so forth. So there are multiple Gospels, and you might have heard of, for instance, the Gospel of Barnabas, or there's a Gospel of Thomas. Right? There are Gospels of various companions of a Gospel of James, for instance, that's not included in the New Testament. So there's just different Gospels. These four Gospels were chosen much later, and the rest of them were basically put together and burnt. The way Uthman burnt the rest of the copies of the Quran. Right? It's haram to burn the Quran. He burnt it in his ignorance. Right? So the same way there's a council of kind of Christian leaders also did the same thing. They collected four, and the standard is not very clear. Right? But they collected four, and then they burnt the rest and said, none of the other ones are proper. Different sects. The Catholic Church accepts some different Gospels. The Eastern Orthodox churches also accept different Gospels as well as part of their New Testament, as part of their version of the Bible. But the point is that just because these four are not the only Gospels. And so what we find is that this particular story of the bird being created by Isa alayhi salam, it's also narrated in one of the Gospels. It's called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Right? So it's a Gospel by one of the disciples named Thomas, but it's about the childhood of Isa alayhi salam, of Jesus. And so in there, the phrase is this. He says, Jesus then made soft clay and shaped it into 12 sparrows. Right, so the same story is mentioned there, and that he made these 12 sparrows, and he blew life into them, and they took off. They became living beings. Another miracle he mentions besides the bird is that he'll heal the blind. The word akmah that's used in Arabic, right, we have two words in Arabic for a blind person. An a'ma is what you might be familiar with. An a'ma is a blind person who is not necessarily congenitally blind. He could have been made blind afterwards, right? But an akma that's mentioned here is somebody who's congenitally blind. Right? From birth, he's never been able to see. Right? So this is somebody who's never had the ability. Isa alayhi salam is able to cure it. Right? That's even a more a more impossible feat than curing a person who did see and then can't see because of some disease or some other situation. Somebody who never was able to see, he doesn't even have the organs, like it's just like the nerve connections probably aren't even in place, right? Even that sort of a person, Isa alayhi salam was able to cure and give sight again. So that's what an akmah person is, as opposed to an a'ma. He said, I'll cure the leprous people, like people who have leprosy, right? It's a disease, basically, your body rots. As you're living, your body starts to fall apart, your limbs fall apart, your skin starts to kind of slough off. And it's just a kind of a very ugly and almost frightening disease. That people shun lepers, or they want to stay away from them, make sure they don't get it's not contagious, it doesn't transfer to them. So it's a very ugly sort of disease. Isa alayhi salam, one of his things was he was able to cure these people. And to revive the dead. Another nearly impossible, like, certainly impossible feat for any human being, where he's able to bring people back from the dead. Alright, these some of these miracles are also mentioned in the Bible. So let me share some of these things from the Bible as well. In the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 9, right in the beginning of Matthew 9, Jesus heals a paralytic. At this, some of the teachers of the law, Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over, and came to his own town. Some men brought to him a paralytic, a paralyzed person, a paralytic lying on a mat. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." And whenever he would say your sins are forgiven, the priest, the Jewish priest, would go crazy. They would say, "How dare this person? This is blasphemy. Nobody can forgive sins except God." And so we don't know if Isa actually said this or not, but this is what's attributed to him in the Bible over and over again. So then he forgives this person's sins, and then he says to the paralytic, "Get up and take your mat and go home." He basically uses this. He said, "Your sins are forgiven." They object and say, "How can you forgive his sins? That's God's job." Then he asks, "Is it harder to forgive his sins or to make this paralyzed person stand up and walk home?" And they said, "Of course, there's no way he's going to stand up and walk home. That's harder." So he says, "I can do that. So if I can do that, then I can forgive his sins." And so he tells the person, "Get up, take your mat and go home." And the man got up and went home. When the crowd saw this, they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to men. And this is the end of this phrase is significant. It says they praised God, right? And that's like, it's not Isa Islam, and he is God, and this proves that he's God. They praised God for this authority that he gave to men, to a man like Isa Islam. And so that fits very nicely with our beliefs as well. That he's not a God or deity at all, but he's doing everything by the will of God. Another phrase in Matthew where he cures people is in, let's say, Matthew 9, verse number 18. A dead girl and a sick woman. While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before... Ruler, I don't understand what it means here. It seems like it means a woman. I'm not sure why the word ruler is here in the King James Version. But say a woman came and knelt down before him and said, "My daughter has just died. But come and put your hand on her and she will live."